Hello strangers and story lovers, and welcome to my lair. Today we're talking about Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. It honestly just sucked me right in. The descriptions are so beautiful and vivid, and yet absolutely horrifying. Just morbidly satisfying, and yet so precious. I just really want to protect this book now. I'm its guardian. Don't come for it. But anyway, let's get into it now, shall we? As per the now usual, I will start with a spoiler-free section where I will just share my general thought on the story, and then I will jump into a spoiler zone where I will detail my thoughts a bit more, and I will also spoil everything. But fear not, I will let you know when to jump off the review if you want to preserve yourself from any spoilers. When Andrew returns to boarding school, he can't wait to find refuge in the twisted fairy tales he writes for Thomas, the boy with hair like autumn leaves. But Thomas's parents have vanished, and he has blood on his sleeve. Stranger still, Thomas won't talk to Andrew, even though he's always loved sketching the monstrous creatures of Andrew's stories. Desperate to uncover the truth, Andrew follows Thomas into the forest and catches him fighting a nightmarish monster. His drawings have come to life. The boys must battle the creatures every night, but as their obsession with each other grows stronger, so do the monsters, and Andrew fears the only way to stop them might be to destroy their creator. So yeah, pretty simple story it seems. Andrew and Dove go to a rich kids' boarding school where they met Thomas, a dreamy artist boy who likes to draw monsters. And he uses his talent to illustrate the morbid fairy tales that Andrew loves to write. And I just loved it. It must be the little emo kid that is still dormant somewhere inside me. If I had to describe the vibe of this book in 3 words, it would probably be beautiful, fragile, and dangerous. Anyway, let's start with the positives. Let's start with the characters. I honestly loved most of them, and the ones I didn't like, I don't think I was supposed to like them. Because the book is very efficient at making you hate the characters you're supposed to hate. Most of the main characters were kind of messed up in their own way, and Andrew is probably one of the worst offenders. Him and Thomas both have a very dark mental scape, and because they're artists, they have a little bit of a tendency to just express themselves in this overly dark, artsy, overdramatic way. So they end up saying very morbid things to each other. And Andrew often has these very weird thoughts. Like, one of his obsession is to just kind of merge with Thomas one way or another. Not as in he actually wants them to, like, merge or fuse, but it's more like his very dramatic way of expressing his love for Thomas. So it's often something like he kind of wants to be sewn into his skin or like craft their ribs together. The book has a bit of an obsession with ribs, by the way. And the way he expresses it is always very beautiful and poetic, but also, well, wrong. And it's very efficient, like it really just keeps you on edge throughout the book. Is Andrew actually going to do something messed up, or is it just his overdramatic way of expressing himself? I don't know. I cannot believe some people actually cope with nails like these. Well done, whoever manages this on a daily basis. I cannot. Although I suppose you kind of get used to it. He needed Thomas. Needed the lungs sewn inside each other so he could remember how to breathe. Andrew, go to your room. Straight away, Andrew. Go to your room. There's really a sense across the story that their love is something beautiful, but also something dangerous. And I really love that. I always find it kind of fascinating in story, especially in horror stories, where love is turned into something almost kind of uneasy. It's very unsettling and a great source of horror as far as I'm concerned. Especially here when the lines are just so blurred that you don't really know how deep it goes. You'll cut me open and find a garden of rot where my heart should be. Andrew let the silence sharpen between them. Waited until Thomas's breath caught in quiet anguish from being made to wait. When I cut you open, Andrew finally said, all I'll find is that we match. Oof. I loved Andrew. I felt like it was very easy to empathize with him and with his anxiety. I just kind of wanted to cradle him and tell him that everything was gonna be okay. And then the next second he was saying something completely twisted and I was just like, okay, Andrew, you go play. Thomas, even though you never really see his thoughts, you can tell that he has an equally twisted mindset as Andrew. At first I was a little bit worried for him when you see kind of how Andrew feels about him, and I was just a little bit like, ooh, is Thomas in danger? Like, should I worry about him? But then it's very clear at some point that even if he would absolutely be down for it, because him and Andrew have a very similar way of thinking and not a similar way of loving necessarily, but just a very compatible way of loving. You can also tell that he has a lot of anger in him, and his relationship with Andrew and Dove is very weird but also very intriguing. And none of the other characters are as odd as the two of them, although Dove did put me on edge a few times. Not Lana though. Lana is a goddess sent to save us all. Second thing that I really liked about this book was the style. The style was honestly just gorgeous. There was something really both tragic and poetic about the style and the descriptions. It got dark, it got gruesome, it got beautiful, it got poetic. Really, truly gothic. There were a few times where I was just completely taken aback by one of the most beautiful, delicate descriptions I had ever read, and only for the style to then slap me in the face with one of the most twisted and gruesome things I had read in a while. For a vicious moment, Andrew thought about slipping his fingers into Thomas's cut, taking hold of his rib and breaking it, pulling the soft crumbling bone from his chest and sewing it into his own. They'd be forever together, rib against rib, fused in gore and bone and adoration. Also, the descriptions of Thomas always got me. You can just really tell through the descriptions all the love and admiration that Andrew has for him. There is such a softness to the descriptions of Thomas, with like the tousled hair, the messed up clothes, the paint stains on his face, and the color pencils everywhere on his fingers. Just so many soft detail that paint such a vivid and clear picture of this kind of dreamer of a boy. Like, I could just see him and all the precious moments that came with it. And I felt it. I felt it. Everything looked the same. Auburn hair and sharp jaw and face like someone had upturned a whole jar of freckles on him. He was at least a head shorter than most boys his age, and he wore his uniform like he'd been in a fight. White shirt scrubby and untucked, tie a mangled noose at his throat, no blazer, no vest, ink-stained fingers and paint smudged under his jawline. No, not paint, a scab. Andrew resisted the urge to reach out and rest his thumb over the shape of it. Third thing I really loved about the book was just the atmosphere. Not much to say about the atmosphere, but because the story is well written and the style is absolutely on point, of course, the atmosphere was just perfect. The forest was so beautifully described. You get really this impression of this surreal, fascinating place that's both ethereal and very dangerous. You know, there's kind of a saying that I kind of hate and feels very pretentious. Every time someone says it, it's like, oh yes, this forest, like this place, blah, blah, blah. It felt like a character of its own. But in this book, the forest did feel alive. It really just felt like it had a mind, a presence, and a will of its own. Honestly, just gorgeous. I just had some images in my head of some forests that I visited in Scotland with some friends, with just like moss everywhere, even on the trunks of trees, and just like you could imagine trolls or fairies just popping out everywhere. And that's just kind of the vibe and the images that this book created in my head. Honestly, the atmosphere and the descriptions just made me feel things. Other thing that I really liked about the book were the descriptions of the monsters. I love monsters, and I love monsters that make my skin crawl, and honestly in this book they did. And I loved every second of it. And the way they're just described like a mix of flesh and bone and thorns and vines, it was just like, so good. It was stunning. I just want to print all of the descriptions of the monsters from this book and just like kind of pin them on my walls. Its arm was bone, flesh hanging off in rotting ribbons, skin pulled so tight over a naked chest that ribs punctured through. But its face, vines poured out of its mouth, eyes, ears, growing and writhing. Blood slipped between its lips as another vine broke out of its flesh and sprawled towards the ground. Next thing that I loved about this book was just the story. The story is obviously amazing too, very psychological, where you just don't really know what's going on and who you can trust. There are a lot of questions and mysteries throughout the story itself. Why are Thomas and Dove fighting? Why is Dove isolating herself? Why is she giving Andrew the cold shoulder even though he did nothing to her? Where did Andrew get the scars on his hand from? He himself doesn't seem to remember where he got them, but apparently everyone else does. The book just has an aura of mystery to it, and it just kind of all comes slowly. It feels a bit like walking through a fog is probably the best way I could describe it. And when it all just comes unraveling and all the mysteries are solved, it's just beautiful and very, very satisfying. And I think it really is the type of books that deserves a second reading because... Phew. But anyway, I think that's it for the spoiler-free zone, my dears. We are now walking into spoiler territory, so if you haven't read the book, leave now, go read the book, then come back and see if we agree. But before that, please click the like button and subscribe if you want to see more of my face. Anyway, now I consider all of the non-spoiler people gone, so let's spoil. Our story starts right at the end of the summer holiday, which always tragic. And it's time for our main character, Andrew, to get back to school with his twin sister, Dove. And the car ride to their boarding school is cold. Because Dove, Andrew's twin sister, is apparently refusing to talk to their father due to some argument that they had. So their father, in turn, doesn't talk to her. We get a description of Dove who is presented to us as this perfect being of absolute perfection. She is beautiful, collected, intelligent, and very, very popular. While Andrew describes himself as an emotional mess who she always constantly needs to pick up and put back together, which is incredibly sad. But let's not dwell on it for too long, because just as Dove is leaving, our love interest arrives, Thomas. Which is a bit odd, because Andrew basically just told us that Thomas, Dove, and Andrew himself are an inseparable trio. But apparently Thomas and Dove had a bit of an argument before the summer break, and now they're just not really talking to each other. Which, again, is odd, because apparently it's not uncommon for Thomas and Dove to fight. They actually have regular arguments, but they usually make up really fast. They just never really get angry for super long. But again, let's not linger on that too long, because we have other very important things to worry about. Like the fact that Thomas' neglectful parents have apparently disappeared. And cops have apparently showed up to the school and they seem very suspicious of Thomas. And at first, Andrew doesn't think too much about it, but then Thomas starts acting weird. He's on edge, he stops drawing, and he gets very snappy. Apparently, he also arrived very early at school the day of his parents' disappearance, and Andrew had spotted something that looked like paint on his sleeve. But now thinking back about it, it could have been blood, actually. And apparently some of his neighbors also saw him in his own living room with a knife shortly before he left for school. So... sus. Thomas' parents had a lot to answer for. A strange calmness spilled over Andrew. He let out a breath, long and slow. "I don't care, you know," he said. "If you did." Thomas went still. Which I thought was a violently sweet thing to say. Although odd. This is great for scratching. Truth be told, I don't really know how I would react if someone said that to me. But Thomas is definitely not happy about it. Thomas jerked away. "This is why I can't talk to you about anything real. It either freaks you out so you turn into a goddamn mess or you respond in the most screwed up way possible. These boys are brutal. This is when I need Dove." Thomas's eyes were bright, a storm wearing itself out. Andrew barely recognized his own voice, raw with a bitterness he never showed. "Go be with Dove then." Ouch! Oh, that hurts even more on the second read. Yes, Andrew has this thing where he persuaded himself that Thomas was in love with Dove. Yes, he's a sausage. Thomas's eyes looked liquid green, violent and wild and bright. "Are you hurt? I'll kill anything that touches you, I swear." Totally in love with Dove! Anyway, after that whole debacle of Andrew telling Thomas that he doesn't really mind whether or not he killed his parents, Thomas just decides to stop talking to Andrew and he just completely avoids him. He doesn't even really sleep in the dorm that they share together anymore. And he comes back in the morning with muddy shoes and just Andrew starts spiraling a little bit. And odd things also start happening to him, like not just odd but legit creepy things, like ghostly presences in his back, and he gets bitten at some point by something that apparently is in a hole that he dug in the ground for some reason. Don't ask. He also finds fungi in his pockets at some point. He thinks he finds a pool of blood in the forest somewhere, but then it disappears. And it all culminates at some point when he actually gets attacked by a monster in the bathroom. And yeah, that scene... damn. That scene... I wouldn't say scared me, but... let's say I was tense. In the green glow from the emergency exit sign, legs appeared under Andrew's stall door. They were hard to distinguish, half eaten by the dark, but he could tell they were slender and furred. A senior prank. It had to be. They hoped to make him piss his pants and then they'd laugh about it for weeks. He could get through that. He knew what it was to be a target and survive. His mouth trembled. Too soft. Too sensitive. Pathetic. Panic bricked up his lungs. He just wanted this to be over. Bang! Fist against the door. It shuddered. The legs shuffled and made two sharp, clear taps, like ironed horseshoes on tiles. Andrew forced himself to peer under the door. Hooves. Each leg ended in perfectly round hooves. Yeah, that got me. That got me. I was on the edge of my seat. That that was good. That was good. After that, Andrew decides to go to the forest by night because it seems to be where Thomas is disappearing every night, and Andrew just kind of wants to confront him for ghosting him. But what he finds instead is a terrifying monster that attacks him, and Thomas saves him. And after that, Thomas confesses that, yeah, this is what he's been doing every night, fighting monsters in the forest. Because it seems that these monsters are his own creations, monsters from his drawings based on the fairy tales from Andrew. Which of course got me wondering why he just assumed that it was his own creation instead of Andrew's. But hey. And apparently those are the things that killed his parents. Which is why he cannot tell the police what actually happened. Rightfully so, because I really don't think anyone would believe him. So Andrew tells him that from now on they will fight the monsters together. And while Thomas isn't too keen on it at first, because at the end of the day he really just wants to protect Andrew, Andrew just decides to tag along regardless. Meanwhile, we learn that Dove's friend Lana just suddenly starts talking to Andrew a lot. And she's very protective of him, even though the year before she barely talked to him. And bizarrely enough, she doesn't seem to be hanging out with Lana that much anymore. Like, at all. Andrew hasn't seen them talk to each other at least once. But for some reason, she seems to really have it out for Thomas, probably because of his own conflict with Dove, which all just starts getting more and more mysterious. What did they even argue about? And why is Lana so angry with Thomas over it? Just what did Thomas do? It's just, yeah, very intriguing. Slowly the monsters start creeping closer and closer to the school, and Andrew and Thomas just really struggle to keep them secluded to the forest. One of them, the monsters who they call the Antler King, even manages to sneak into the school and kills one of the teachers, but he was a massive dickhead, so it's really not the end of the world. The Antler King attacks Andrew and calls him the prince, which I really wonder what it could be referring to. Maybe the fact that it's really his creation and not at all Thomas's. Most disturbingly, during the attack, there is a vine that went into Thomas's ear, and ever since then he had this swollen lump on his ear that apparently is very, very painful. He touched the swollen lump behind his ear, now grown to a boil the size of a grape, a gorge of blood and pus. Just an ear infection. It depressed when he dug his thumbnail in. He suddenly couldn't stand it. Rummaging around in Thomas's art supplies produced a paper clip. He uncurled it and bent his ear with one hand, resting the sharp tip against the lump. "Don't," a small part of him whispered. He stabbed the paper clip in, hard. Pain shot through his ear in a dazzling explosion. He gasped as the lump burst, liquid sliding down the back of his neck as agony slashed red across his vision. The thick smell of the forest seized his throat. When he peeled his hand away from his ear, mud smeared his fingertips and clotted clumps. Milky sap instead of pus. A single seed, coated in blood. Why though? Why? He touched his ear and felt it swollen afresh, stretching as if something had regrown while he slept. But this time it wasn't pushing against his skin and trying to escape. It was growing the other way, going in deeper. It was inside him, he knew. The forest. Oh dear, oh why? Why am I reading this? Anyway. Andrew starts vomiting leaves after that, which I heard is rarely a good sign. What's a good sign, though, is that at some point Andrew starts realizing that the monsters are not coming from Thomas's drawings, but from his own stories. And Thomas has known for a while, but he wanted to protect Andrew, so he said nothing. Oh, did I mention he's totally in love with Dove? But yeah, basically, Andrew realizes that he can actually change the fate of these creatures if he writes the story about them as they appear. And he uses that to force some of the monsters that attack them to reveal what they want. And unfortunately, it seems that what they want is a sacrifice. They want Andrew to cut out his own heart and bury it in the forest. Sacrifice. Every good story ends with a wishbone snapped, a bloodied kiss, the princess sacrifice. Cut out a heart and bury it in the wood. But you already knew that, Prince. Well, let's not dwell on that. Andrew and Thomas have a heart-to-heart after that, and Thomas decides to finally reveal to Andrew how he feels. Everything inside me is in ruins, Thomas said. For you. Yeah, totally in love with Dove. Okay, I'll stop. The confession doesn't really go too well, though, because Andrew is asexual and he just kind of assumes that it's just not gonna be enough for Thomas. That he is just not gonna be enough for Thomas, so they just end up having an argument because of that, because they're just very silly like that. But then Andrew goes and finds Lana, and because she is the goddess that will save us all, she just handles it beautifully. I think, Andrew whispered. It sucks to be ace. I think, Lana said, the world sucks for making you feel that way. I am officially changing my religion to Lanaism. And as the first mass in her name, I will just read to you another passage that has the most accurate description of our goddess. She has resting murder face, Chloe said, but she's aggressively friendly. That's it, now let us pray in her name. You're welcome. Anyway, after that there is another monster attack. And then Andrew gets summoned to the principal's office, seemingly out of nowhere. And when he arrives, the school counselor also seems to be there for no good reason, as well as the school bully, Bryce, who seems particularly proud of himself. I haven't really mentioned him before because, honestly, just screw him. But he does appear a few times before that, and he's just an absolute pain in the ass. And this is just his crown achievement. This is the moment where he went for me from he's annoying but I've seen worse to he should really burn in hell. Because what he's done is basically tell the principal that Andrew has been sneaking into the forest, which is forbidden. So Andrew gets expelled, which is just completely insane. Especially when you know the plot twist later on. I guess part of it makes sense, but still, just screw them and screw Bryce in particular. So Andrew is very shaken. He just can't leave because for all he doesn't particularly like the school, his whole world is here. Thomas is here, and he cannot just leave and let Thomas to battle the monsters on his own. But at least the monsters have the decency to attack the bully next, so he dies. A boy hung from the trees, vines noosed around his neck and thrust down his throat, leaves curled out of his ears, still growing, his clothes torn where the rose thorns had caught against flesh, all the better to find blood on which to feed. Touch me again and I'll kill you. Aren't you pleased? This is exactly what you asked for. Bryce Kane stared down at Andrew while a forest grew from his hollowed-out eyes. Gruesome, thank you. Then after that and a few more shenanigans, Andrew gets a visit from Dove, who tries to convince him that he is hallucinating and that Thomas has been arrested at the beginning of the school year and that there never was any monster. That Andrew is just completely losing it. Which makes absolutely zero sense, of course, but that is when it really hits Because you know what would make sense? Dove being dead. She didn't talk to their father the whole car drive to school. You didn't see her talk to anyone the whole school year. She always hangs out on her own. Andrew does comment a few times on how weird it is that she doesn't hang out with Lana. Lana suddenly being super overprotective of Andrew. He is her dead best friend / potential crush, dear little brother. Of course she's going to be protective. It just all makes so much sense. You need to listen to me, he said, low and urgent. You were not talking to Dove. I was... that thing you were talking to. It wasn't her. She's my sister. I know her, Andrew. Thomas's voice cracked. It can't be her. You know that. His eyes looked like 1,000 shattered mirrors as he pressed his thumb into Andrew's mouth. All he could taste was blackberry briars and dirt and forest rot. That thing was not Dove, because Dove is dead. Basically, last year, before the summer holiday, Thomas and Dove did have an argument about Thomas having the hots for Andrew and wanting to make the move on him. And Dove was scared because she just was afraid that it would mean the end of the trio that they are. And so she tried to confront Thomas to stop him from making a move. And so they argued, and Thomas left. And after that, Dove went to the forest on her own, fell from a tree and knocked her head on a rock, and died. And Andrew was so in shock that he punched a mirror, hence the scar on his hand. And then he blocked it all out. It's perfect. It just makes so much sense. And it honestly just ties together some mysteries that I really didn't think were connected. The situation with Lana, the argument between Dove and Thomas, the reason why Dove wasn't talking to anyone, and why she was being so cold to Andrew. That explanation just solves every mystery in one go, where I just kind of, maybe stupidly, thought that there were multiple explanations for all the things, but no, there's just one, and it explains everything perfectly, I might add. And the pace of the reveal is just so good. You just kind of start piecing it together. At least I did start to piece it together a little bit ahead of the reveal, when Dove is just acting so cold and mysterious, and just the explanation and the revelation just kind of hits me before, and then it's just kind of building and building and building it. It was just such a satisfying moment, because just when I clocked it and understood what was going on, just everything fell into place. Everything just made sense, and all those little breadcrumbs, they just start falling into the most perfect of bread, and that is a terrible analogy. But anyway, it just fell all perfectly into place, and it was just so satisfying. So good. Just so good. After that, Andrew decides to finally pay the forest the tithe it's asking for, and just sacrifice his own heart. But Thomas tries to stop him and tells him, the forest doesn't need your heart, it needs a heart, so just take mine. And it's a little confusing, so what I'll do is I'll just kind of read a few bits and tell you what I think happened. But just know this, Thomas said as he fought back tears. Dove's death was an accident, and she never would have haunted you in revenge. This is all you're doing, and you could tell a different story if you wanted to. You're strong enough. You're brave enough. Andrew slowly peeled Thomas's filthy shirt back just enough to show his trembling skin over his heart. He pressed fingertips against warm flesh, felt the throbbing, bloody beat. hot and fierce and alive, alive, alive. They didn't need two hearts. They could share Andrew's, even if it was a bruised and sorrowful thing. The rib bones would twine together in a lattice to protect them from the worst of the world, and they would always be together. They should never be apart. He began to cut. Andrew lowered his head so his mouth was close to Thomas's ear. Wake up. I need you to tell me if we're real. Thomas didn't open his eyes, but his face had gone soft. All that fierce anger and lonesome fear slipped away. Kiss me, he said, low and sleepy. Then you'll find out. So, Andrew cut out Thomas's heart and gave it to the forests. And then either the last scene is them dying together or Thomas dying in Andrew's arms. Or how I choose to see it, they just kind of start living off of Andrew's heart. So Andrew shares half of his heart with Thomas and finally fulfilled all of their fantasies of merging together one way or another. And it's very twisted, but also very beautiful in a very messed up way. I think I love it. Honestly, there were just so many times across the book where Andrew had these thoughts of wanting to merge him and Thomas's ribs together, share the same heart, or share one skin. So that's why, to me, seeing this ending as them sharing one heart, it just makes sense to me. And of course, it's not just because, like, I'm a sucker for happy endings, although, yeah, that's mostly that. But it's also thematically accurate and acceptable. It's relevant, okay? It makes sense. It's not just because I'm an emotional, fragile little being. Honestly, the plot twist at the end with Dove being dead was just so perfect. It made so much sense. It's just so well paced, the reveal, and how everything just falls into place with that one reveal. I thought it was just really well handled. And the seeds are just so well planted from the beginning. It was just gorgeous. And one could argue, that Andrew having amnesia and not remembering that she's dead is a little bit convenient, and I know it can be a bit of a problem for some people, like, oh, amnesia, how convenient. But for me, it works because Andrew's fragile psyche is so well established that it's just like, yeah, absolutely, I can 100% believe that he would block the traumatizing memory out. I think it just makes sense. Absolutely, he would repress a memory like that. So yeah, it's such a good reveal and such a good plot twist because it was so well prepared in every single way that when it drops, it just makes so much sense that I was just thinking, how did I not see it coming? Because it was the only logical conclusion. So yeah, stunning. So now let's talk about the characters. Let's start with Andrew. Andrew is great. I really love him. I really empathized with his struggle, and his anxiety and insecurities just broke my heart so many times. Thomas being in love with Andrew is just the most obvious thing ever. Like, I think maybe from page 3 or 5, you can tell that he's heads over heel with him. And the whole school knows it too. And yet Andrew just cannot compute and accept that a guy as wonderful as Thomas could ever love a guy like Andrew, that he just completely refused to see the absolute obvious. And even when Thomas tells him, like, no, dude, I do love you, then Andrew just goes like, oh, well, then you won't like the fact that I'm asexual then. I don't know how many times you need to be told that the guy would literally kill anyone for you and that everything is in ruin in him for you before you stop thinking that he wants in your sister's pants. But a few more times, apparently, is the answer. It was really gorgeous and heartwarming, and at the same time it felt just very toxic, with just how Andrew just constantly wanted them to merge, and there were times where he kind of sounded like he kind of wanted to hurt Thomas and himself so they could just like merge and be together and everything. And with just Thomas wanting to just constantly kill everything and anyone that would just look at Andrew wrong, and even just kind of wanted Andrew to hurt him almost, and his constant need to sacrifice himself for Andrew. Just how Andrew just keeps telling these very twisted, messed up things to Thomas, and then Thomas just always comes back crawling. They just felt so wrong, and yet they were so caring and loving, and because they were just both on the same wavelength, it just kind of worked, but as in worked for a horror setting. He knew how to ruin Thomas, the same way Thomas knew how to ruin him. They're just kind of the worst for each other, but also kind of the best, which I think just works so well for a horror story. It's fascinating and it's morbid at times. And because they are both in the same dark, morbid place together, it just works. It doesn't feel like one is dragging the other into a dark place. It feels like they were both in the dark place to begin with, and they just found each other there. And it's very uncomfortable, but it's also very heartwarming, which in turn makes it all the more uncomfortable when you realize that this twisted romance make you feel kind of warm and fuzzy on the inside. There were just times when I was thinking, what is wrong with me? Why do I like how messed up they are? But anyway, let's talk about Thomas now. Thomas is great. I absolutely adored Andrew's descriptions of him. I think they really paint this lovely and charming image of an artist. And for someone like Andrew, who has such a dark and sinister mental scape, the descriptions that he gives of Thomas really stood out because they were just these really soft and light and colorful visions. There's always an idea that he has this speckle of colors on his clothes and on his hair and on his face. And they just make him stand out as this spot of soft pastel colors on a very dark background, which I thought was beautiful because it's probably exactly how Andrew sees him. His extreme protectiveness of Andrew was just something very precious. And because you're not in his head, and so you don't really get his point of views, you don't get, especially at the beginning, the sense that he's just as twisted as Andrew, and so he almost feels, at least at first, like he's kind of a prey to Andrew's weird thoughts of wanting to like merge their rib cages together or share the same lungs and everything. And there were a few times early on when I was a little bit scared for Thomas, where I thought Andrew could hurt him. But then he's just going to say something equally as dark as what Andrew says, and it just becomes clear that no, they're just on the exact same wavelength, and it's basically a shared fantasy. And I don't know if it makes it better, but I'll pretend it does. Anyway, let's talk about Dove now. It's a little bit hard to talk about Dove. Well, first of all, because we don't see her that much. And what little we see of her is a ghost or Andrew's reconstruction of her. But it was really interesting to see the confrontation between Andrew's vision of her and the real her. Andrew's vision as this perfect and popular and collected girl who can do no wrong, and who he envisioned as being sick and tired of having to put up with him and his anxiety. And then to actually confront that to the reality of her at the end, when we see a flashback of just right before she dies, where we realize that she could also be an insecure and fragile thing herself. To the point where she very selfishly tried to stop the budding relationship between Andrew and Thomas because she was just so scared of losing them both. Which is just so sad, and I just could not blame her for it. Because while yes, it's selfish, it just made me also sad for her to see that this is what she had on her mind. But for all the description that Andrew had of her, that she was perfect and that she was so strong and that she was probably sick of him being this fragile little thing, I found it very interesting and fascinating to realize that she was actually just as insecure as he was, and that she was just as scared of losing him and losing them as Andrew was. And that all the time that he was jealous of her because he thought she was involved with Thomas and he was scared of losing Thomas and losing her, she actually had the same thoughts, except hers were founded. So yeah, I just really liked seeing the difference between who Andrew thought Dove was and who she really was. And even though we discovered that she's a little bit selfish in this one instance, I thought it was interesting to see how not perfect she ended up being, and how more similar they were than Andrew really realized. And I thought it was just really sad and tragic. But now you need to drop everything that you're doing at the moment, because we're just about to talk about our ultimate goddess. I just want to reiterate that Lana is a goddess, and you just cannot stop me. Lana is just cool, and I love how aggressive she is about being a good friend. And her trying to protect Andrew now that Dove cannot do it herself was just so amazing of her, so sweet, so revealing. And another thing that I really loved about her is how the scenes with her and Chloe looking after Andrew just always felt like such a breath of fresh air in a very dark story. It was just a moment for Andrew to be able to talk to someone who wasn't in on all of the insanity and could just be there to support him and bring him some comfort that, for as perfect as he is, Thomas just wasn't able to give because he was just too involved in the insanity of the monsters and everything. So yeah, Lana was absolutely precious and perfect in every single way. And Chloe, her friend, was also just really great. Like, they were amazing, a breath of fresh air. And of course, Lana is a goddess. And I think I'm done. Honestly, glorious story. I will absolutely 100% read the next book from this author. The style is perfect, and I just love this brand of horror where the danger and the discomfort comes from within or from loved ones. So this is just really up my alley. I just felt absolutely transported in this weird dark universe every time I sat down to read. I absolutely loved all of the characters I was supposed to love. And it's just a mess of really complex characters with really complex, tangled up emotions and relationships. And it's just my jam. It is. Anyway, that's it for Don't Let the Forest In. Leave a like if you've enjoyed the video and subscribe if you want to see more of my face or how crazy my wigs and costumes will get in the next ones. I can't guarantee that it will always be this ridiculous because honestly this one was a little bit of a pain. I swear between the nails and the ears and the wig and the crown, I just had a time. But yeah, thanks for tuning in and continue to enjoy stories.